He was just the janitor, silent, invisible, and ignored in the crowded halls of a city high school. Teachers brushed past him, students mocked him, and no one ever asked his name. But when a forgotten lottery ticket in his coat pocket turned out to be worth $7 million, the story flipped overnight. What started as a stroke of luck soon spiraled into a storm of media attention, judgment, and a city desperate to control his next move. This isn't just about money. It's about genius hidden behind a mop, dignity denied, and the power to rewrite your own story when no one believes in you. Watch until the end to see how Marcus Lennox went from janitor to revolutionary, and why his quiet revenge is the one no one saw coming. Most people barely noticed Mr. Lennox. He was there, sure, pushing his squeaky-wheeled mop bucket across the marble floors of the state lottery building 5 days a week. Same faded green sweater, same slow steps, same tired eyes. He never complained, never joked around like the younger janitors, and never seemed in a rush to finish anything. If you passed him in the hallway, you might have nodded politely, or maybe not even that. But there was something different, something hard to explain. He always seemed to be thinking, really thinking about something far away from the mess he was cleaning. Once someone caught him whispering what sounded like numbers under his breath. Not 1 or 2 digits either. Long strings of them. 3.14159. Carry the 2, factorial, maybe logarithmic decay. The security guard, Larry, had paused, watched him for a second, then shrugged. "Weird guy," he muttered, walking off. No one ever asked about Mr. Lennox's past, not once. They assumed he had none worth knowing. That's the thing about people. They decide who you are before you even say a word. But here's what nobody knew. Lennox had once studied at a top university, mathematics, pure cold logic. He could see patterns in static, order in chaos. But things hadn't worked out. There had been complications, a sick relative, a messy situation with financial aid, then bills, then odd jobs, and eventually this. Mopping floors in the very place that would unknowingly hand him a second chance. He didn't mind the work, not really. The job gave him time to think, time to observe, and time to notice what no one else seemed to care about. The patterns in the past winning numbers displayed on the giant LED board near the front of the building. They flashed every 30 seconds. For transparency, the company claimed. But to Lennox, they were data, clues, and perhaps something more. That day, after cleaning the lobby, he stood for a moment, mop still in hand, eyes on the board. 14 to 26 to 39 to 44 to 57 to 18. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, almost to himself, it happened again. He turned and walked away, quietly humming what might have been a tune, or maybe a formula. The cleaning closet on the second floor didn't have much. Just a stack of buckets, a bent vacuum, and a radio that only played static on one side. Mr. Lennox kept his own broom separate from the others, not because he was picky, but because, well, maybe he was. It had the right weight, the right bend in the handle. He liked when things felt consistent. What wasn't consistent, though, was the lottery board. Each week, new numbers lit up in rows of 6. People barely glanced at them. Maybe they checked to see if their cousin had won again, or to roll their eyes and mutter, "Figures." But not Lennox. He studied them, quietly, obsessively, over years. In the break room, the other janitors talked about sports, weather, whatever was in the headlines. Lennox listened sometimes, nodded when appropriate, but he was often somewhere else in his mind, a space where numbers didn't just exist. They danced, repeated, contradicted, echoed. There was a clipboard tucked into the corner of the maintenance cart he always wheeled around. On the surface, it held a checklist. Clean lobby, mop bathroom, trash bins, repeat. But sandwiched between those pages were his true notes, columns of digits, drawings of scatter plots, ratios. He wasn't doing this for fun. He was testing something, a theory he hadn't dared say out loud. You see, people always say the lottery is random, pure chance. That's the whole game, right? But Lennox wasn't sure. Over time, he noticed odd clusters, not patterns you'd catch in a week or two. No, this took years, decades really. 44 shows up again, he muttered one day as he wheeled past the board. He paused and made a mark in the margin of his notes. That's the 5th time this quarter. Strange. He wiped a smudge from the tile floor, almost mechanically. The numbers lived in his mind now, even when he wasn't trying. He'd see sequences in license plates, tile grids, even the alignment of janitor lockers. Maybe it was unhealthy, maybe not. Later that day, while wiping fingerprints from the glass surrounding the main lobby display, he found something interesting. The winning numbers from 2 months ago were almost identical to last week's, except for one swapped digit. Coincidence? He didn't think so. People design these systems, he reasoned, and people, no matter how clever, have habits, blind spots. Maybe they didn't randomize as well as they thought. Maybe, just maybe, there was a door left slightly open, a crack of predictability in a world built on odds. He glanced over his shoulder. No one was watching. They never were. Then he leaned forward and whispered to himself, "I think I found a seam." Mr. Lennox lived in a small, dim basement apartment on the edge of the city. It was the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking. Just a side door under a chipped brick stairwell with no nameplate, only the number 3B scratched onto a rusting mailbox. Inside, the space was tight. Not messy, just full. Books leaned sideways on crooked shelves. Some were library discards, others he'd rescued from secondhand shops. Titles like Probability and Human Error, or Statistical Shadows peeked from the stacks. On the walls, dozens, no, hundreds of pages were pinned up. Some loose leaf, others torn from notebooks. All were covered in numbers. There was no TV, no sofa, just a small table, a single chair, and a mattress on the floor. A little window near the ceiling let in a sliver of light during the day. At night, it was barely darker inside than it was outside. This is where he worked after his shifts ended. He would change out of his janitor uniform, put on his worn-out hoodie, and sit at the table with a black pen. Always the same kind, ballpoint, medium tip, slightly leaky. On the table, he had arranged the last 15 years of lottery results in a spiral pattern. Not for art, though honestly, it kind of looked like art, but because he was watching the sequence curl around itself, checking how it looped, where it bent. "I'm not crazy," he said once out loud, though no one was there to hear it. "Just paying attention." He paused, then leaned back and looked up at the ceiling. Or maybe both. That night he noticed something strange. A certain number, 18, had started showing up more often when it was paired with 39. Not every time, but just enough to raise his eyebrows. "That's not chance," he murmured. "That's someone's mistake." He didn't smile, not yet, but something deep inside him, something that had waited quietly for years, started to wake up. It was a Tuesday, cold. One of those gray, silent mornings when the city seemed to move slower, like it hadn't quite woken up yet. Mr. Lennox stood outside the corner shop across from the lottery building, staring at the fogged-up glass door. He'd passed this place 100 times, maybe more, but today felt different. He stepped inside, the bell above the door letting out a weak jingle. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and a rack of crumpled newspapers leaned against a gumball machine that hadn't worked in years. A young cashier, barely out of high school, sat behind the counter playing with his phone, half asleep. Lennox didn't waste time. He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. On it were 6 numbers written in careful, deliberate ink: 18, 26, 39, 44, 57, 3. He had checked these numbers against thousands of past draws, simulated probabilities, looked for shifts in frequency. He even ran models on old hardware cobbled together from discarded office computers. It wasn't a guess, not really. Still, as he handed the paper to the cashier and asked for just one ticket, his fingers trembled slightly. The kid raised an eyebrow. "Powerball's low this week," he said, scanning the numbers into the machine. "Only 7 million. Most people wait for the big pots." Lennox nodded. "That's fine." A pause. "Sure you don't want to do the quick pick? Better odds." Lennox didn't respond. He simply slid the folded bills across the counter, eyes steady. The kid shrugged and printed the ticket. "Your money, man." Lennox took the slip with both hands, folded it once, then tucked it neatly into his wallet behind an old library card. No ceremony, no smile. He turned and walked out into the gray morning. Rain had started to fall, light and lazy. He didn't look back. Wednesday night came without fanfare. Most people were winding down, flipping through channels or scrolling on their phones. Some probably forgot the drawing was even happening, but not Lennox. He sat cross-legged on his thin mattress, a chipped radio on the floor beside him. The TV was off. He didn't own one, and the room was quiet except for the soft hiss of static. He didn't look nervous, not exactly, but his foot bounced, just a little. That barely noticeable tap, tap, tap some people do when their thoughts start racing ahead of them. He'd calculated, recalculated, second-guessed, then circled back. There was always a chance he was wrong, always a variable he didn't consider. Still, something about the numbers felt solid this time. Not perfect, nothing ever was, but close. The radio crackled, then came to life. And now tonight's winning Powerball numbers are... He leaned in, the slip of paper already in his hand, folded and unfolded so many times that the crease had started to tear. 18. He blinked. That was 1. 26. 2. 39. His grip tightened slightly. He barely breathed. 44. 57. That was 5. And the Powerball is 3. There was silence in the room. Real deep silence. Not even the radiator clicked. He stared at the radio like it had just spoken in another language. Not because he didn't understand, but because, for the first time in years, he didn't quite know what to feel. He looked down at the slip, checked it once, then again, then pressed his thumb to each number slowly as if the ink might lie. But it didn't. He'd done it. He had just won $7 million. He didn't shout, didn't leap up, didn't cry. Instead, after a long moment, he set the ticket down carefully on the mattress beside him, rubbed his forehead, and whispered almost uncertainly, "Now what?" The next morning was strange. Lennox woke up later than usual, his eyes feeling heavy, his brain still not fully awake. The ticket sat on the mattress beside him, untouched, like it might suddenly vanish if he blinked. But it didn't. It was still there, still real. For a few moments, he simply stared at it. The weight of it, both the paper and the possibility, hung in the air, filling the small basement room. There was no rush. No one was expecting him anywhere. No crowds, no cameras, just the silence of his own thoughts. He stood up slowly, stretched, then shuffled over to the tiny kitchen and poured a cup of stale coffee. He hadn't bothered to make a fresh pot, not that it mattered. He didn't feel the need to rush into the next part of this, whatever the next part was. He wasn't sure if he even wanted to go to the lottery office. Not yet, anyway. The phone rang, slicing through the quiet of the morning. He froze. It was an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something in his gut told him to pick up. "Mr. Lennox?" a voice on the other end asked, its tone slick with practiced politeness. "This is Janet from the Lottery Corporation. Congratulations on your big win. We'd like to discuss your prize." His heart skipped a beat. Sure. I've got the ticket right here." There was a pause, and then the voice came back, much more formal now. "We'd appreciate it if you could come down to claim your winnings as soon as possible. There are some logistics to sort out." Lennox felt a small knot in his stomach. The phone call was sudden, but in a way it made things feel more real. He wasn't imagining it. $7 million. He could hardly wrap his head around it. "I'll be there soon," he said quietly and hung up without waiting for a response. He looked at the ticket once more before grabbing his coat. Then with a deep breath, he stepped out the door. The lottery office was, in a word, overwhelming. The building stood tall in the heart of the city, its glass exterior reflecting the overcast sky like a giant mirror. Inside, the air felt sterile. Bright white lights, polished floors, the faint scent of disinfectant. Nothing about it felt warm or inviting. Lennox stood in front of a large reception desk, hands folded together, trying to keep his mind from wandering. He had imagined this moment so many times, but now that he was here, the reality felt like something out of a dream. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears as he waited for the receptionist to look up from her screen. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice robotic. She barely seemed to notice him. I'm here to claim my prize," Lennox said, his voice coming out a little rougher than he expected. Her eyes flicked to the screen in front of her, then back to him. "Your name?" "Lennox. Marcus Lennox." The receptionist typed something quickly, then glanced up again, her eyebrows furrowing. "You've won the Powerball? $7 million? Lennox nodded. There was a slight tremor in his hands now, but he didn't know if it was from excitement or nerves. Maybe both. She looked back at her screen again, then gave him a tight smile. "Right. Well, congratulations. Please follow me to the back. We'll need to verify your ticket." As they walked through the sterile corridors, Lennox couldn't help but wonder if someone would stop him. Tell him it was all a mistake, a mix-up, a lucky coincidence. But no one did. The process was routine. Too routine. Finally, they reached a small office, and Lennox was asked to sit in a plush chair across from a middle-aged man in a suit. The man shook his hand, smiling broadly. "Mr. Lennox, let's get this all squared away." Still, Lennox couldn't shake the feeling that at any moment, someone would say the whole thing was a mistake. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. And yet the ticket was in his hand. The numbers matched. It was real. But was he ready for what came next? The days after claiming his prize blurred together. At first, it was just the paperwork. Endless forms, the security protocols, the necessary checks to ensure everything was legitimate. Lennox went through it all quietly, as he always did, keeping his emotions in check. But then, as the days went on, something began to shift, something he hadn't expected. It started with the phone calls. It was just one at first, then two. Then the next day, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. Numbers he didn't recognize. Reporters, lawyers, financial advisors, all asking if they could help him, interview him, get his story. Lennox, who had spent his life blending into the background, found himself suddenly thrust into the spotlight. He avoided most of the calls, answering only a few when it seemed necessary. But even in the rare moments when he did pick up, his heart raced. The voices on the other end were always friendly, too friendly, as though they were trying to figure out who the real Marcus Lennox was. What made him tick? They didn't know. He didn't even know anymore. "Mr. Lennox, can you tell us how it feels?" one reporter asked. "What's next for you? Are you planning on quitting your job? What will you do with all the money?" Lennox paused. What could he say? The truth? That he hadn't quite processed it himself? He found himself staring at the ticket again, the one now framed and hanging in his small apartment. He could see it, but it didn't feel real. The numbers on the slip, the faces of the people who'd congratulated him, the overwhelming attention, it all felt like a dream. The pressure began to mount, each question, each interview, making him feel like a stranger to himself. The truth was, he didn't have any answers to give. He hadn't figured out what to do next. The world seemed to expect him to have some grand plan, but all he knew was this: he had the money, and he had a choice. But the weight of that choice felt heavier every day. At night, he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd made the right decision in coming here. Was this the life he wanted? Or was there something deeper, something hidden that he still hadn't uncovered? Lennox sat in his small, quiet apartment, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the silence. He turned off his phone an hour ago. He couldn't take any more calls, not today. The papers on his desk, the stacks of forms and contracts and advertisements for financial advice, all seemed to mock him. His entire life had been one quiet, controlled equation. But now, with $7 million in his bank account, everything felt out of balance. He hadn't told anyone about the prize. Not his neighbors, not his co-workers, not even his old friend Kevin, who'd moved to a different city years ago. Lennox leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling, his mind racing through endless possibilities. What now? What was he supposed to do with all this money? It wasn't just about the lottery anymore. It had become something bigger, a chance to rewrite everything. But rewrite it into what? He could quit his job. He could leave behind his life as a janitor, go to some tropical island, and never lift a finger again. The thought sounded nice, but what would he do there? How long could he live in that kind of luxury without something gnawing at him, without something missing? The other option was to invest in himself. He could use the money to fund his research, the stuff he'd been doing quietly in the background for years. He could prove finally that his theories were more than just ideas scribbled on crumpled paper. But would the world listen to him? Or would they write him off as a lucky, oddball genius who'd cracked the lottery? Suddenly, his phone buzzed on the table beside him. He glanced at the screen. It was another call, another reporter. Lennox picked up the phone, but this time, he didn't say anything. He simply listened as the voice on the other end launched into another round of questions. "What's next for you, Mr. Lennox? What are you going to do with all that money?" He took a deep breath. The answer wasn't clear yet, but the one thing he knew for sure was this: he wasn't just going to be a bystander in his own life anymore. He wasn't going to let the world dictate his future. It was time to make the decision, for better or worse. The morning after the decision, Lennox woke up with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in days. It wasn't that the answers had magically appeared. It was more like the weight of the world had shifted off his shoulders, and now there was room for something new. The money, $7 million, was still there, still real. But today it didn't feel as heavy. Instead, it felt like a tool, a way to create something, to finally be seen. Lennox stood by the window looking out at the sprawling city below. The streets were busy, the traffic moving in and out like the pulse of the world. It was strange to think he had been a part of that world, just a janitor, invisible, unnoticed. But now he was part of something else, something bigger. He picked up the phone and dialed Kevin's number, his old friend from years ago. It rang a few times before Kevin picked up. "Lennox?" Kevin's voice was familiar, warm. "What's going on, man?" I won the lottery," Lennox said, his voice steady but with a quiet excitement underneath. There was a long pause. Then Kevin laughed, shocked, then amused. "Man, you're kidding, right? $7 million? What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to invest it," Lennox said without hesitation. "I'm not just buying things. I'm going to start a foundation, a research institute for mathematics, something that will change the way the world thinks about numbers. I want to fund projects, mentor young people, show them that you don't have to be flashy or loud to be successful. You just need the right idea. Kevin was quiet on the other end. Honestly, that's amazing. I always knew you'd do something big. But this is huge, man. Lennox smiled faintly. It's time to prove it. He hung up and took a deep breath. There was no more hesitation. The world might see him as lucky, as some fluke who got lucky with the numbers. But he knew better. He wasn't lucky. He was determined. And now, with the resources to back it up, he was going to show the world what he could really do.